All right, it is 6 p.m. Brussels time, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the Ecopath online seminar series, which is brought to you by the Ecopath Research and Development Consortium and is hosted by ourselves at the European Marine Board. Just a few housekeeping rules. If you are going to ask a question or so, please make sure that your name is in the Zoom link so that we know who is asking the question. For those of you who are panelists, please keep yourself muted during the talk, and then afterwards when we have questions, you can obviously come out. For those of you who are just as a webinar, as a delegate, you please also make sure that you put your name in the question and answer. If you ask a question, please use the Q&A for that, and please if you can, put where you're from, because that also really helps. And then once Bob has finished his talk, then I will read out your questions. If you have any technical problems, please put it in the chat and I will try to help where I can. Just to be aware, this webinar is being recorded. It is available on the Marine Board YouTube channel and on our website and on the Ecopath YouTube channel. Not quite yet, but we will put it there later. So just to remind you, the webinar series is meant to be every 2 months. We haven't had one for a while. I think November was the last time. And we held them on the last Tuesday of the month, usually at about noon Eastern Standard Time, 6 o'clock Central European Time. And the next one hopefully will be on the 28th of June, but at the moment we're still waiting for to hear if somebody wants to give a talk. So if anybody's keen to talk about their work, please be aware that we have an open space for that. But today we have Bob Ulanowicz. He is was from the University of Maryland and is now at the University of Florida nominally. I think he's mostly retired. And he is going to give us a talk about ecosystem networks, a gateway to a process worldview. So Bob, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you can start sharing your screen, that would be great.
Okay, screen share. Share. And there we go. Okay, thank you, Sheila. Thank you for...
Bob, just be aware you're not at your first slide.
I'm not at my first... Oh, yeah, thank you, thank you. Boy. I don't know how that happened. Good. A little bit better. What a way to get started. Anyway, thank you, Sheila, for inviting me back to essentially recapitulate the message that I gave at Ecopath 35 back in Tampa. And the message is short and clear. It's that ecosystem network analysis is not science as usual. It's really an opening to a much richer viewpoint on the natural world. Fortunately, the development of Ecopath has made it much easier to create balanced networks of ecosystem exchanges. It's helped network analysis to burgeon. Of course, trophic flow networks have been a feature of ecosystem science now for over 75 years, but networks did not enter the largest scientific arena until the late 1990s when physicists finally discovered network graphs. The ensuing burst in the literature was very impressive, but almost all the work was devoted in the spirit of physics to uncovering the mechanisms that give rise to different manifestations of networks, small world, free scale, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as a result, many ecologists still exhibit physics envy and believe that ecosystems dynamics are driven from both by physical and chemical mechanisms, a wholly derivative science. The idea pursued is that by compiling mechanism upon mechanism, we will eventually arrive at a complete understanding of ecology. Now, such was not the outlook of Eugene Odum, who in 1977 asserted in Science To achieve a truly holistic or ecosystemic approach, not only ecology, but other disciplines in the natural, social, and political sciences as well, must emerge to new, hitherto unrecognized and unrestricted levels of thinking and action. Wow. In other words, to make further progress, science needs to move beyond obligate reductionism, and network analysis can help lead the way. Now, of course, physical constraints remain important features of ecosystem dynamics, and no one is claiming that the fundamental laws of physics are somehow violated. Nor am I advocating that we wholly abandon mechanistic ecological modelers. I know many of you out there do that, and I've done it myself. But physics is limited in what it can explain as regards ecosystems' behavior. Now, at this point, I make my normal caveat. If you do not have tenure in the academic world, be careful of repeating anything I say. It can be dangerous. Physics does have its limitations, but they're rarely mentioned in the academic arena. I can think of at least 6 deficiencies of physics as applied to community dynamics, but I'm only going to focus on 3 of those today: heterogeneity, processes, and what I call apophasis, or the absence of actual positivist attributes. I'm going to say a few words about each and suggest how networks can help to complement these deficiencies of physics, so that together, physics and network analysis, you get a broader picture of the world. The first thing to notice is that physics is all about homogeneity. Ecology deals with heterogeneity, often in a major way. Networks, almost by definition, can portray, or meant to portray, heterogeneity, but it has been well known for over 100 years now that physics is all about homogeneity. In 1913, Whitehead and Russell, in their monumental Principia Mathematica, showed that all the force laws of physics are equivalent to operations on homogeneous sets. That is, the variables always have to be, all the tokens have to be identical. All electrons are identical. All hydrogen atoms are identical. All mass is assumed to be identical, et cetera, et cetera. Ecology, however, is all about heterogeneous systems, sometimes about massive heterogeneity. It is commonly thought that heterogeneous systems can be treated by applying physical and mechanical laws to each heterogeneous type separately, and then weaving the many equations together through connecting the boundary value or the boundary constraints, as with coupled differential equations. Now, this does work reasonably well for systems of small dimension. But beyond about n of 12, combinatorics begin to pose serious problems. The complexity of the boundary value problem increases roughly as the factorial of the number of variables, a function that grows exponentially with n. In 1969, Walter Elsasser showed how a system with about 75 distinguishable elements, that's a small number when you're talking about ecosystems, has more combinations than the maximum number of physical events, of simple physical events, that could have possibly occurred in the entire cosmos since the Big Bang. Wow, that's a big number. Under such conditions, the boundary value problem becomes what Stuart Kauffman calls unprestatable, an understatement. This means that one cannot formulate a closed solutions for coupled equations describing even moderately complex ecosystems. But this is only an epistemological difficulty. That means, our ability to see and know. It might be that the system is still determinate, despite our inability to formulate the problem, like with chaos theory, for example. I would maintain that such is extremely unlikely, given the incredibly dense packing of alternative states about any given state. Infinitesimally near to any state are so many other possibilities that the nonlinear laws lose their ability to designate a particular pathway. The future of the system is strongly affected by external contingencies. The laws are not violated, they still constrain, but they can no longer determine outcomes, especially outcomes as regards the relative numbers in each state. Networks are intended to represent heterogeneous systems, and I will mention shortly how they can be used to state and test hypotheses in abstraction of any mechanisms the system might encompass. In other words, without mechanisms. Now, physics focuses on objects moving according to universal laws. Ecology deals more with processes and relationships, and that distinction is very telling, because life itself is not an object. It's a process, or more accurately, a configuration of processes. Network thermodynamics is an engineering discipline that deals with objects or states connected by process relationships, just as we see in Ecopath and our normal predator-prey relationships. The conventional take on causality is that the objects create and control the processes. Tellegen theorem in thermodynamics, however, says that in near equilibrium realm, the two are related in linear fashion and are entirely symmetrical. That means that processes can affect and often even create objects. In other words, they're interchangeable. If indeed the notion of complete mechanical reductionism fails rational scrutiny and physical laws only constrain, then what does determine and maintain the obvious order we observe in living systems? Here, it becomes tempting to identify the material genome as that which creates and sustains order. Material causality, however, is a very poor basis for dynamical agency. As ecologists, our charge is to focus on processes and furthermore upon configurations of processes, as we see in Ecopath, as providing the agency behind development and evolution. In particular, attention must be paid to chains of irreversible processes that fold back upon themselves, feedback loops that by their very nature defy the closure restriction of Aristotelian logic that underlies most of physics. To see how configurations of processes can exert agency in a system, let us consider a particular class of process configurations, namely autocatalysis. A simple example of autocatalysis is the triad of processes you now see in the figure. In the course of its action, process A somehow benefits B. Let's see if we can, okay. B in turn benefits C, which then abets A. When this configuration is perturbed by an arbitrary contingency, several outcomes are possible. For example, if a contingency should happen to impinge upon B so as to make it either more sensitive to A or a better catalyst of C, then B will receive more enhancement from A. Conversely, if the contingency should decrement the action of B, the dynamics are, that will result in B receiving less benefit from A. The dynamics are asymmetrical, okay, resulting in the system accruing those changes in B that increment autocatalysis, okay? This gives it a certain temporal direction. Changes in the system are always to benefit autocatalysis. In this way, participating elements are continuously being changed and sculpted in unprestatable fashion by the autocatalytic configuration of processes. An ecological example of such autocatalysis is the configuration enabled by the aquatic genus of carnivorous plants known as Utricularia. Utricularia has a high ratio of biomass to area to biomass. It's very leafy in its leaves and hosts a film of periphyton on its surface, always. a close-up of one of these utricles that appear on the system. The periphyton serve as rich sustenance. That's the boundary, the shaded boundary. And so if the periphyton serves as a rich sustenance for small zooplankton, some of which bump into hairs in the entrance to small sacs or utricles, which open up and then suck the organism in by negative osmotic pressure. The utricle mouth then closes on the zooplankton, much as a Venus flytrap captures insects. Now, one particular change that could happen is that it could enhance its ability to take in a particular resource. Autocatalytic selection would favor such an intake. In other words, if there's a change in B, it might help B bring more heterotrophs in. Such potential aggradation applies also to C and A as well, so that autocatalysis will support the tendency to capture ever more resources from outside the loop, a dynamic that can be described as centripetality. I emphasize that centripetality is ubiquitous in the living world. All living things draw needed resources into themselves. Everybody's got to eat. But it is usually neglected as a requisite attribute of life, strangely enough. Bertrand Russell, however, back in 1960, identified such aggrandizement as the driver behind all of evolution. I mean, that's a little bit of heresy in today's world, I'm afraid. This is because whenever two sources of centripetality are present in a finite field of resources, they will tend to compete for the limited resource. That is, listen to this, competition is not a primary action. It is always a secondary phenomenon, derivative of indirect mutuality at the next level down or up, okay? To be clear, I'm maintaining that the conventional scenario of determinate physical laws and blind chance is not adequate to promote and sustain living ensembles. Those ensembles, having only those dynamics, are more likely to fall apart and decay. Fortunately, the combinatorics also make it highly likely that autocatalysis will somehow arise among any sufficiently complicated collection of processes. When autocatalytic selection and centripetality are combined with system memory, then growth and development become possible. The members of an autocatalytic system are constantly exposed to arbitrary contingencies from without. Most such disturbances do not affect the system in any significant way, but some are harmful enough to degrade the system performance, and survivals will adopt responses to redress such perturbations. A small minority of contingencies will enhance mutual beneficence, and memory can then incorporate those changes into a more developed system dynamic. Now, two caveats are pertinent to this scenario. Firstly, as mentioned earlier, it is not necessary that memory initially be vested in material objects such as DNA and RNA. Ensembles of processes by themselves can take on very stable configurations that can serve as memory until such time as material structure might appear to record that memory. Terry Deacon, for example, believes that the precursors of RNA originally performed some function like energy storage or transfer in a proteomic system, and only later were repurposed to serve as memory. Secondly, the scenario naturally develops a perceptible direction. That direction is in the direction of higher, greater autocatalysis, although that course is always subject to change as a consequence of later contingencies. So it's not truly a fixed goal. This developmental scenario can be regarded as proceeding in a non-random but indeterminate fashion. Now, That's a little confusing. It sounds like non-random and indeterminate is an impossible combination. But its palpability can be illustrated through a metaphor used by physicist John Wheeler to describe the development of science. And I'll just go through that very quickly. Wheeler described development of science as like unto a parlor game. Guests are at a party and decide to play a parlor game. It's sort of like, not charades, but I forgot what it is. One individual is sent out of the room, while others are to choose a particular word to be guessed by that individual. Upon returning to the room, the subject questions members of the group in some more or less loose rotation. Responses to the questions are limited to a simple binary yes or no. As soon as the questioner leaves the room, one diabolical guest, like myself, suggests that the group not choose a word. Instead, the first respondent can answer yes or no on absolutely unfettered whim. Similarly, the second person is at liberty to make either reply, the only constraint being that his or her answer may not contradict the first reply. Similarly, the succeeding answers may not contravene any of the previous answers, so that the game is driven to an endpoint when the subject is asked, is the word competition or is the word perspiration or whatever? And the only possible example is yes. At any time, this game is non-random because it's dependent on the previous history of questions and answers. The end result, however, cannot be predicted at the outset. Serendipitously, the game metaphor also illustrates a second important feature of natural development. The exercise takes the form of a conversation, where the questioner seeks to narrow the realm of possibilities while the respondents endeavor to broaden the field with each answer. Such agonism between ends is usually characterized as a dialectic. And the analogous situation in the natural world to this dialectic pits structure building processes such as autocatalysis against entropic disorder and decay, the inevitable results of the second law. Now, thus far, I've chosen to refer to contingencies instead of chance events. I deliberately avoided the word chance because that term is conventionally applied to events that are simple, directionless, indistinguishable, that is homogeneous, and repeatable, assumptions that permit the application of standard statistical analysis. Such requirements encompass only a small fraction of a continuum, a wider spectrum of contingencies. Contingencies are more often than not complex and exhibit inherent direction. As mentioned earlier, Elsasser argued that the number of compound events that can arise is so enormous that many will be unique over all time and space. Some of them, of course, will be absorbed into the ensemble, the routine of a system and be repeated over time later on. But at first, they are not indistinguishable or repeatable. Obviously, unique events are more radical than blind chance, whereas other forms of arbitrary phenomena can occur under increasing degrees of constraint. Conditional probabilities, for example, refer to events that exhibit some degree of bias, like a loaded dice or something like that, in directions that are influenced by surrounding events. Such bias can grow quite dominant, resulting in almost law-like propensities that yield the same outcome in a large preponderance of instances. Hence, we see that there exists an entire spectrum of contingencies ranging from radical unique events to absolute determinism. Any of these forms are capable of fitting into an existing autocatalytic pathway in a way that can advance autocatalytic performance by significant leaps and bounds. Physics relies almost exclusively on positivist entities. Ecological dynamics depends significantly on what is missing. Gregory Bateson, back in the 60s, pointed out how the absence of anything almost never figures into physics scenarios. One rare exception is the Pauli exclusion principle. But if a predator or prey goes missing, major changes can ensue in ecosystem dynamics. I will call the absence of something apophasis to distinguish it from conventionally existing objects or phenomena like energy or mass. It is fortuitous that networks provide an ideal vehicle for representing and quantifying the combined action of presence and apophasis. To see this, one need only look at a typical simple ecosystem such as the network of Cone Springs. The arrows connecting the elements are usually taken to represent constraints between initiator, that is prey, and receptor, predator, which indeed they are. For example, 4, the detritus, I hope you can see that on your screen, can only contribute to, detritivores, 4, can only contribute to detritus and carnivores, not to any of the other. They remain constrained from contributing to any other element. But networks are almost never fully determinate. There remains indeterminates, for example, as to which receptor from the detritivores the next quantum of energy will flow, to detritus or to carnivores. As Claudia Pawlowska once put it, networks are an amalgam of constraint and indeterminacy. They're neither one or the other, but an amalgam of both. The critical question is, how can one quantify the degrees to which constraint and freedom, the lack of constraint and apophasis, are present in any given network? Now, you may be a little bit confused because apophasis is rarely the object of quantification. In fact, some of you may be asking, how is it possible to quantify something that doesn't exist? Well, the secret is to describe it in terms of some measurable capacity of things that do exist. For example, the glass is half empty, provides a measure of the water that is missing. One school of mathematics is actually grounded in measuring potential capacity and providing a yardstick for residual apophasis. That part of mathematics is called information theory, because it begins with a measure of uncertainty, things that aren't certain, as the capacity for information, and proceeds to define positivist information in terms of any decrease in that uncertainty. Rather than epistemological uncertainty, I will refer to the lack of constraint as ontological indeterminacy. We can begin our quantification by defining Tij as the magnitude of the effect that I has on J. We then identify the total action occurring in the network as the sum of all the Tij, or the total system throughput. We then quantify the total diversity or capacity among the Pij according to H, the formula used by Shannon, which is minus pi, minus the sum of pi log pi. In this form, it's actually minus Pij log Pij, which quantifies the flow diversity, which is always greater than or equal to 0. Now, a well-known result of information theory is the partitioning of H into 2 non-negative components, okay? H can be written as, where is it? Where's my, oh, there it is. H can be written as this one component, which is the mutual information, and the second one, which is called the conditional entropy. Both of these are always non-negative, and they can be normalized For example, we can call small a being the mutual information divided by the whole total capacity. And that normalizes it between 0 and 1. And we call that the degree of order in the system. But there's a complement, small phi, which is big phi divided by h, which is a measure of the degree of freedom or disorder within the system. And the two sum to 1. Okay, whereas I'm always losing my cursor. A plus phi equals 1. We now define robustness R as minus the log of the degree of order times the degree of order, just like minus p log p. Okay. Now, the answer, we then can ask ourselves, how do real ecosystem networks apportion, or are they apportioned in terms of constraint and freedom? And the answer is a little bit surprising. My original hypothesis was that ecosystems would progress towards maximum organization or efficiency. That is, little a would progress towards 1. This is A along the abscissa, and the order would process towards 1, perfect order. Such was not the outcome, however. Networks from ecosystems found in different habitats clustered around values close to 0.4. And Dr. Heymans actually helped me confirm that, inhabiting what's called a window of vitality between about 0.35 and 0.45. Rather than progressing towards maximal efficiency, the ratio between efficiency and freedom or reliability appeared to settle into balance between the opposing attributes. This was an instance where an hypothesis, my hypothesis, was falsified in abstraction from any consideration of mechanism. Okay, it's totally phenomenological. We describe the networks according to some mathematical formula that has some degree of reliability, and we see how it operates. And we can actually come to conclusions that way about how the system is acting. This result has some significant implications. Ecology and evolutionary theory are rife with assumptions that everything progresses towards maximal efficiency. Crawford Holling, however, argued that systems of maximal efficiency tend to become brittle and highly vulnerable to arbitrary perturbations. The loss of flexibility and freedom to adapt can result in significant negative consequences. In designing systems, rather than trying to maximize system efficiencies as much as operations research tries to do, one might better try to mimic the more propitious balance between efficiency and reliability that is found in natural systems like ecosystems. It turns out that the window of vitality overlaps with a maximal value of robustness. This allows one to invoke simple calculus to calculate the sensitivities of robustness R with respect to each Tij. Okay, this is the system level robustness. Tij is each of the species, and for each species you can calculate this big mess here, which is its sensitivity. Now, a positive sensitivity would say that if you add a little bit more to Tij, you get closer to the balance. A negative value would say you get further away, and this allows you to implement an iterative thing where you calculate the sensitivity of Tij, you then change the value of Tij, you do that for all the Tij, and you keep on doing that iteratively until you hone in on a balance. And that balance hopefully is somewhere near about 0.4. And it should be sustainable because these ecosystems, after all, are sustainable in nature. But these results likely to pertain to other disciplines as well. Economists, for example, jealously guard their systems against anything that could dampen or infringe upon market efficiency. Bernard Littier has argued that this stratagem is flawed and results in the familiar boom and bust of depression and boom. He suggests that such swings could be mitigated by the introduction of alternative currencies, which happen to impact overall market efficiency. When you have these parallel currencies, it usually degrades market efficiency. Furthermore, designers of power grids and water distribution networks have been experimenting with this method of incorporating balance into their systems that would trade efficiency for more fail-soft recovery from system catastrophes. Even urban planners have been implementing the iterative protocol to design street plans and traffic flow patterns that would avoid the worst traffic situations. I emphasize that these promising engineering experiments are the result not of physical mechanical models, but of the phenomenological study of ecological networks. They are eco-mimicry, if you will, and they exist in abstraction of causal considerations. The bottom line is that although necessary and informative, physical mechanical considerations cannot portray the full gamut of ecological dynamics. Ecology now no longer stands as a derivative science. It offers its own gateway to advancing scientific knowledge of the living world, and networks are becoming a principal tool for investigating these new pathways. I would like to suggest that younger researchers, and hopefully many of you are out there listening now, explore these new opportunities and explore how Ecopath and ecological network analysis can help one work outside the box of conventional reductionism. Physics and mechanisms are no longer sufficient to gain a full understanding of how ecosystems behave. Network analysis affords a pathway into what I call a third window, and will fulfill Eugene Odom's vision of ecology as the new integrative science. Ecology is no longer a secondary science, but rather can now take on a leadership role in advancing the scientific enterprise. I thank you for your kind attention, and I would like to dedicate this particular presentation to my wife's relatives who live in Ukraine and are essentially undergoing a very difficult time. And we hope that that will end very soon. Thank you again for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was great. I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen so we can
Yes, I'm sorry.
see everybody else. I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A. I don't know if anybody of our participants have any questions. And I don't know if Santiago and Billy, if you have any questions.
It was a very compressed presentation, so there should be a lot of questions, and I'm hoping to be able to answer them.
Yeah. Billy, did you have a question? I saw you shaking.
Oh yes, I was just I was just wondering if we might get anyone from the participants.
I haven't seen any questions, neither in the Q&A nor in the chat. But sometimes once we start asking questions, people have time to think of, to formulate their own. So
I've learned from courses that sometimes a little bit of silence helps put pressure on getting.
Good to see you again, Billy.
Santiago.
No, you guys forget that there's a loading time required. So I'm going to throw one out there.
Yes.
Thank you, Bob, for this great talk. You mentioned 3 limitations of physics, but you said that there were 6. So which are the other 3?
Yeah. You're taxing my geriatric memory right now. I emphasize the 3 major ones. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back and actually look it up. I feel like I'm at a thesis defense and I've gone blank on everybody. But physics, first of all, they depend on the continuum assumption, okay, and there's symmetry, and networks do not depend on continuum assumption and symmetry. Okay, that's one. What are the other two? Um, physics are all reversible. Okay, the laws of physics are all reversible. How do you get irreversibility? That's simply not a question in network analysis. We assume essentially that the systems are irreversible and that all the processes that represent the arrows are irreversible. And there's one other thing, and it eludes my memory right now.
Maybe you can think while Willie asks his question.
Sure, yes, because my question is going to be so simple that he won't need to think while I'm asking. Oh, Bob, you have done some absolutely groundbreaking work on ecosystem growth and development, and actually brought it on the map that this is something that is important for not just if you work with network analysis, but in general in ecology. And I'm wondering if you have some messages from your work for the ecologists that are interested in how the ecosystems are going to be developing on the human impacts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Billy. It's great to see you again. What can I say? But yeah, I emphasize my whole system metrics, mutual information, conditional entropy, and so forth, because I see them as extremely important in locating where your trouble points are in the ecosystem. If I were to go back and show you what the equations are for those two values, each process, each arrow contributes one term to the whole metric, okay? So you can look at those individual terms and you can look at the sensitivity and so forth and find out where in the system stress is most likely to appear and take a hit. And of course, I already talked about how you can, if you have a system that's ill-behaving, how you can take those equations and use them to change all of the values, all of the weights in your network, to put them into better balance, to come closer to the window of vitality. That I think is very important. But there are other things that you've actually included in Ecopath that I've developed earlier for things like the indirect events. How much does A contribute to B over all pathways of all lengths? The what do we call the Lindemann spine? We have a big network. Can we map that into a straight chain of exchanges that represents the trophic losses along each step? And we can see how that changes when the system is perturbed, or we can look at it and say, oh, that system is not operating well. We can identify all the cycles in the system, which is a rather laborious process if your system is big, and maybe even insoluble if it's too big. But the cycles often tell you very much about how the system is acting and what the controls are, because the controls are almost always involved in cycles. When we take most aquatic systems, marine or freshwater, we discover that there's almost always two chains that go through it. There's a phytoplankton chain, a littoral chain, and there's a detrital chain at the bottom and so forth, and that the two interconnect and whatnot. We can follow how that changes with time. So not all of the work involves organization and the metrics of organization, but in my personal viewpoint, that's where the real new work is and where I have put most of my effort into. And it's finally beginning to catch on, thanks in large measure to Ecopath, because it's made a lot of people create these networks and then say, well, what can we do with them? And we got a network, what can we say about it? It's not a model per se. Of course, EcoSIMS has been created to do that. But I say that even before you go to EcoSIM, I'm saying, go ahead and use EcoSIM. It's a fine tool. But before you go to EcoSIM, what else can this network tell you about how the system is functioning? And I would maintain that it'll tell you a lot, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, go, Willie.
Can I follow up?
Yes, yes.
Very much related to this. You, at some point in when you start off, you mentioned behavior in the context, I think, of physics not considering behavior and ecologists absolutely doing it. And I do find it's really fundamental when we try to seek to predict how ecosystems and their components develop over time. And indeed, for why ecosystems aren't more chaotic than they are. So how does behavior fit into network analysis, and what kind of thoughts do you have on this?
Yeah, okay.
So it really relates from, you start from individuals' behavior and you get to the system somehow. Impacts.
Well, first of all, why aren't they more chaotic? Why is it 40% and not 10% chaos and so forth? And the reason for that essentially is these structure building processes such as autocatalysis. The autocatalysis is accompanied by memory. It can be either memory in the system itself or memory in the genomics. They build structure around that. Meanwhile, they're always falling apart. They're always being knocked about by perturbations that tend to degrade them. And they eventually have to adapt to it. And in order to adapt, you've got to have a reservoir of chaotic, disordered possibilities that the system can take and put together to counteract the perturbation, so that reliability depends on keeping a certain amount, in this case almost 60%, as chaotic, disordered thing. Now, when we get into design systems, we want to be a little bit more efficient, but we don't want to be too efficient, so that we can then play games with designing a water distribution system, so that if you have a perturbation here, the whole system just doesn't go kablooey like many of the electrical systems do. And you can really fine tune that using these metrics and design it into ensemble systems. And these people, mostly at Texas A&M now, under the aegis of Astrid Layton. She has a group down there that are really working with and doing some really groundbreaking work, I think. And that's all engineering. And engineers are discovering ecomimicry, okay? That the natural system, because it's withstood eons of time and remains sustainable, can tell us something about how we have to design our anthropic systems.
Thank you.
Thanks. I see that there was a question in the chat from Matthias Hailu, who said, and it's kind of related to this, is there a specific cutoff for the value of the window of its vitality? And I think that's that 40% that you're talking about, or is it something else?
Yeah, no, that's just a guess, okay? First of all, it's a guess predicated on a limited number of ecosystems, something about 46 or 48, okay? And if we had thousands of them, as you probably have access to, we might be able to refine that, maybe broaden it somewhat, or maybe it clusters closer. So it's not a set thing by theory. I think that the 10% range is probably going to be pretty good from what I've seen. But another thing is that many people say, well, okay, we've got economic systems. Should economic systems have a 40-60 ratio? And the answer to that is, I really don't know. And as a matter of fact, people like Ali Karazi, who's an economist, have looked at economic networks and seen that they tend to cluster more around 15 to 20% rather than 40%. And then when you get into ontogenetic systems or really ontology, you would expect the efficiency to be much higher. So it might be up about 70 or 80. And I don't know. We just don't have the data for that. And what I have done is try to put this out as a problem for people in those areas to refine. But what I am sure of is that any ensemble system is going to have some efficiency and some disorder, because it can't continue to exist in perpetuity. That's sort of the what is it called, the perpetual motion machine. But the job of finding where those areas are is still unspecified.
Yeah. If you guys don't have another question, there's one from Luis Abarca, who I think used to work with you, if I'm not mistaken.
George Bartholomew, yes, George.
Yeah. So he's from the Universidad Veracruzana from Mexico. He's saying very nicely done, Bob, and please give Marika hello. But the question is, what do you think is the start of knowledge? Is the state of knowledge, I assume, of the effect of species lump? I don't know. Don't really understand that lump or wing in the final result of network structure. Maybe he means grouping.
Oh yeah, aggregation and so forth. Yeah.
Sorry, lumping.
That's been a problem of networks from the very get-go that I've had to face. And let's see if my memory is good enough to remember how I used to face it. What I'm saying, first of all, you make certain decisions early on. What are your items of interest? And then what are the relationships between them? And that colors everything thereafter. And what I'm saying is that if you change those decisions, it will change the network and change, change the species and the connections. And you say, well, that's all relativistic. And what I've said before is that what we really have to do is look at things in a relativistic sense. You have here's the system in this particular instance, and here's how A and C behave. Here we've parsed it differently, and here's those values, and it's changed. And what I'm saying is that what qualitatively the changes in A and C will be the same. They're going to have different values, but I think the qualitative changes will be the same. And I've been putting that out there for a long while now. Nobody's shot it down. Maybe you can, but I really have a certain confidence that when we're talking about these networks, we'll need to talk about them under the particular assumptions that we've made. When we change those assumptions, the values will change, but that they will probably change in a qualitatively uniform way, the same way. That's my guess.
I think that there has also been some papers that where people have actually looked at these values. If you lump groups together, if you combine, a while ago now, I think I've seen papers where they've just looked at this in a kind of iterative process, and there was a certain level where if you combine more, then it really changes how
yes, it does. I think Mercier and Sugihara, I think, had a paper on that. And what they discovered, and I found it extremely useful, is that when you get below an N of about 12, things just scatter all over the place. Now that slide I showed you of the window vitality, all of those species, all of those systems had more than 12
Groups.
tokens in it.
Groups, yeah.
There were a whole lot of other small networks that I found that scattered all over from almost 0 to almost 1. And it was Bob Christian who said to me, Bob, if you look at only the ones that are well articulated, those n greater than 12 and so forth, they seem to group. That was a wonderful suggestion, and you helped confirm that, as a matter of fact, because I really think that we now have the tools to look at larger ecosystems. When we were dealing with differential equations, we had to keep the number very low because things go blooey if we get too many variables. But that's not a limitation, or mostly not a limitation with networks. And I would encourage people to create networks on the order of 15 to 100 or even greater articulation, because I think that you do see certain fine scale behaviors that you won't see when everything is condensed. But the Sugihara and Bercier, I can find that for you somewhere. Try to keep them above 12.
All right. Yeah, Willie?
I feel like going a bit back in time here. Maybe because first time I met Bob was for my PhD defense many years ago when he came to Denmark. Very different from the way we do with Zoom nowadays. But I came from a fisheries background and did a PhD with the first 2 words were network analysis. And I saw I was thinking back then about the importance of building bridges between fisheries and people ecologists working with networks and ecosystems, knowing that fishery scientists focus on fish and ecosystem or network analysis focused on the system. So it's almost like the trees and the forest backgrounds in it. When I look at it today, I would say the fishery scientists still don't see the forest. What can we do?
That's a judgment that you're making, and that you have to convince your fellow fisheries people to. Yeah. Well, I just had a graduate student come to me the other day who wants to look at the Everglades ecosystems. Those of you who are familiar with the Everglades, it's a savanna land in the south of Florida, mostly flooded. And there's been a major ecological perturbation, the introduction of boa constrictors. I've forgotten which one. I think it's Indonesian boa constrictors, or anyway. They've virtually wiped out all the mammalia. I mean, almost just totally. And the big question is, how has the ecosystem changed? Well, of course, that's a beautiful exercise for Ecopath. And we're going to be doing that, as a matter of fact. To what you can do with Ecopath and with some of the software with Ecopath is take out all the mammals and see how it's working now, and then put some of them back in, or take out if we can reduce the constrictors down to 1/10 of what they are now, what will it look like? We did that actually with the Chesapeake Bay and with oysters purifying the water. The thing was that we were over harvesting oysters. The water was getting putrid and not unclear and whatnot. And we wanted to know what happens if you start to replenish the oysters. So we started adding oysters back into the network. And lo and behold, all of the changes, qualitative changes, were in the right direction. We couldn't trust the actual magnitude of their changes because I don't think they would hold up. But I think we can put a certain degree of trust in the qualitative changes. And I would hope that fisheries people would come to that realization, especially those who are engaged in in mixed fisheries where they get a lot of bycatch and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think really, at least at ICES, they are now. They have working groups where they do that, and at least the work that Jacob, my old PhD student, did with them, they're really getting there. So it's not as bad as it could be, but it's definitely better, I would say. They're still not there yet, but it's definitely better. Did you have a question, another question, Santiago, or if anybody else has another question? I think we're sort of at the end of our hour, but I'm happy to continue if you guys want to continue chatting, because I still have a question too. So Santiago, you go first.
Well, I actually have to run in a bit, but thank you very much, Bob, for this amazing exchange. Really, it's awesome to pick your brain.
Thanks, Santiago.
Thank you, Santiago. I appreciate that.
If you need to leave, then that's fine. Bob, I have a question because you mentioned that physics is always, you can always change back there, or is it the other way around? In ecosystems or in ecology, things are
irreversible.
Irreversible, yes. So I wonder what your thoughts are about regime shifts, because certainly from what we've seen with regime shifts is that it isn't reversible. If you change the system or the network so much, then it isn't reversible.
Yeah. Finding that point is something that's probably better pursued using EcoSim than Ecopath, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah. On the other hand, I think we can prognosticate when something bad is going to happen just by looking at the change in networks using the metrics that we have in Ecopath. You know, I don't have, well, I don't know, because I don't have enough instances in mind right now as to you know, where you would see these transition regime shifts, when they would occur, because they tend to occur very suddenly, and they tend to be irreversible. But that is more a dynamical question than it is a matter of topology and processes.
But certainly in the work that I did probably about 10 years ago now with Maciek Tomczak and from he's now at Stockholm. My feeling was that it is, you know, you can definitely see it in the what we would call resilience index as it changes over time. That robustness goes down and eventually it changes. And so yes, it happens really quickly, but I think the pressure that you have to put on it has to be for quite a long time before it happens. And from what we've seen in the two systems that we worked on, and I think other people have worked on it since, it takes a really long time. And then there is a huge change in the topology of the system. That's certainly what we found in the work that we did. So yeah, I was just kind of wondering how that, because I don't think we ever looked at that sort of vitality range for that system. And how
we can follow that very well with our metrics. What we can't do is predict exactly when it will happen. I think we can make some educated guesses using just the networks, but you really need to know a little bit about the dynamics to do that. And we can game it. You know, we can say, okay, let's take out this major predator of this fish and see what happens. We can do all that with Ecopath. But you're right. I think that there's a lot of inertia. These systems generally are reasonably stable. As I said, there's a lot of memory in the topology, and they don't change quickly. But when they change, it's usually very quick. You know, like with the Everglades.
The student that was going to be working on the BOAS there, you might want to direct her to the Ecopath YouTube channel. There are two videos from what's called Fish 501 last year about modeling invasive species.
Okay.
So that's one from the Great Lakes.
Okay. That's Echo. What's that? That's
501. I can put it in the email for you.
No. What's the name of it? Ecopath something? You know.
YouTube.
YouTube. Okay.
Yeah. So the same place where this talk will be available. There are two lectures there about modeling invasive species.
Great.
Using EcoSim Ecospace.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sheila, before we stop, I don't know, do you want to round off here first, or should I say something about next seminar?
Yeah, you can say something. Oh, well, let's say thank you to Bob. If anybody has more questions for Bob, then you can probably email me, and I can forward it on to Bob, or you can email Bob. I will put my email address in the chat, and then I will forward it on to Bob if you want. And otherwise, just thank you very much, Bob. This was great. It was wonderful to go back to my roots with network analysis again, and not think about policies.
I'm glad I remembered something of it. Something.
It
was great. Thanks. And I'll give you the last word, Billy.
Thank you, and Bob, I would like to thank you too. It's a pleasure to see you again. I can't even understand that the last time we met was just before everything closed down. But thank you very much. And then I would like to make a suggestion for the next seminar. I am at the moment working on the Canadian proposal NSERC for the next version of EWE 7. And I think it would be a great opportunity if we use the seminar to talk about what the initial thoughts are for this, and to get some feedback about what would you like to see that we focus on. How should we make the new version? I can say there, you don't need to come and tell me that it needs to be that it should be, that it does. You don't need to say that it needs to be for other operating system than Windows. That's a given. It will be for system independent, and it will also be an online version of it. That's for granted. But how we approach that, how it will look, what you see when you get there, that's the kind of things that we can give some spend an hour on discussing. So for that, I really would encourage everyone to think about it and come with suggestions for what would you like to see that we focus on in this new development. Including you, Alida. I see you are here because I would love to have a chat with you pretty soon about this, because it is going to be a Canadian-led initiative.
Good. Wonderful. I see Alida's raised her hand. I wonder if I can allow her to talk. Alida, if you want to, I think you should be able to if you can unmute yourself. Perfect.
Actually, sure, I didn't mean to raise my hand. I pressed wrong.
Now you're there, so you're going to have to say something.
Just to say I've thoroughly enjoyed the seminar. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to this next seminar, Billy. I think that's great news, really exciting. I'm hoping to get a new EcoSim, EcoSpace project funded through my research organization, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen yet. But yeah, lots to talk about, and happy to chat further anytime. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alida.
Thank you, Alida. Okay, so the next seminar will then be on the 28th of June. And to be honest, I have a horrible suspicion that I can't host it, but I think Billy can host it for sure. And then it would be great to talk about what people want to see in the new version of Ecopath. I will put in a plug for making sure that we keep the network analysis stuff going, because I think there's still there's a lot of people working on it. And yeah. And I don't know if there's no more questions, then it is only for me to say thank you very much again. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Billy, for being there. And we will see you again in 2 months' time. So take care.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.